How will Claudia deal with a very hostile U.S. to the point that even Kamala seems to be manufacturing consent for U.S. intervention in Mexico when she explicitly called out the CJNG, the Las Cuatro Letras, Sinaloa? And do you think big media companies will reduce their aggressiveness to the incoming president? So these forces from abroad, we have the U.S., the media, conglomerates. What do you think it's going to look like for Claudia now as she's about to begin her term?
The media hostility will continue or will get even worse. And that's precisely because, Mexican conservatives have lost their power centers in the corrupt power centers in the judiciary and some of the so-called autonomous agencies. So they're going to put all their chips even more into the dirty war through the media. So I think that's very clear that is going to continue and probably step up. I also imagine that the rhetoric from either a Trump or a Kamala administration against Mexico will continue to be aggressive. But I think that should not be over-exaggerated from the Mexican point of view, because the United States is in a weaker position. The United States is overextended in the Middle East, in Europe, and the Pacific. I think the last thing the United States wants now is to goad Mexico into something. So I think however much the rhetoric runs high in the United States, I don't think the United States is in any kind of position to, invade Mexico or do any kind of that silliness. And I think it's incumbent upon Mexico to not overreact to the rhetoric, because the United States is like this big, crazy psychopathic giant batting around all over the world right now. And I think this is the time for Mexico to go for it, to do what it has to do.
Yeah, stand firm. Absolutely agree. And also, in the face of these kinds of attacks, I do think that we're probably going to see an increase. We've seen it recently in the election. We talked a lot about this on the podcast, about the kind of laundered ideas that get filtered through mainstream media of enemies abroad of Mexico's government who are trying to undermine it, this labeling of Claudia as a narco candidate, the labeling of López Obrador as a narco president. I think this stuff is actually going to increase. I think it's going to get worse. I think there is a mistaken assumption, but I think it's out there, that Claudia will be weaker or not be able to kind of keep Morena coalition together. And so they're going to be more aggressive. I think they underestimate Claudia.
Yes.
Every time that comes up. López Obrador said, in comparison, yo soy fresa, right? He's like, I'm bougie compared to Claudia. So be careful about underestimating Claudia Sheinbaum. But I do think that they're operating under that logic and they're going to do it. And in the face of that, everybody who's watching us, I really appreciate you joining in, because I think you're going to play an important role. The reason we created this program was precisely to fill in that niche, to fill in that gap in terms of the lack of information about what's happening in Mexico in English, but not because, we want to get our names out there, but because that information needs to be useful to you, the public, so that you can convince your friends and neighbors, so you can engage with your politicians. If there is an escalation of the bilateral relationship, of the tensions, if they really start to take more seriously this notion of a unilateral military intervention, which I do think is a possibility, that you become active, that you become involved and actually resist this, because, one part is the U.S. national security doctrine and its various efforts to be the imperialist power on the globe. But I think also, and in the ways that it carries that out, but I think also of it is, they don't want to see Mexico be successful. There's so much about what's happening here that I think many people are viewing as an example to follow. And that means that it's going to look for ways to undermine that, to destroy it, to say, as they say today, right? Oh, if you go down this path, you're going to end up like Venezuela. They would love to turn Mexico into that. If you go down this path, you're going to turn into Mexico in terms of, the economic sabotage that they could unleash on this country, et cetera, et cetera. So all that to say, I think it's very important that there be an active population. And we got a lot of friends of the show who are supporting us. But of course, also all the Mexicans abroad, right? I think you play an important role. It's something that Kurt and I have been trying to emphasize to people inside of the government, that this is important, that you need to be catering your message in English if necessary, like we do here, in order to continue to convince people.